I had always been captivated by the stories of Genghis Khan, the brutal genius who had forged an empire out of nothing but blood and ambition. The way his name echoed through history, both feared and revered, was something that had haunted me for years. It was an obsession, I suppose, a fascination with the depths of human will and the power and ruthlessness of a single individual to shape the world. But I never imagined that I would come face to face with something far darker than any tale I had ever read. It was the spring of 1941 when Dr. Pavel Ivanov, our leader, called us together to prepare for an expedition unlike any I had ever known. We were to journey into the Altai Mountains, far beyond the familiar borders of the Soviet Union, in search of a tomb. A local shepherd had stumbled upon strange carvings on a rock face, something far older than any known civilization in the region. The rumors were tantalizing. It could be the tomb of a great warrior, someone whose name could challenge even Genghis Khan's. The secrecy surrounding the mission was suffocating. We were warned that our findings would be classified. Our goal wasn't merely academic, it was political. The Soviet Union, under Comrade Stalin's magnificent leadership, had no room for loose ends. Archaeology, history, it was all just another weapon in the fight against capitalism, imperialism, and the counter-revolutionaries. We were the chosen few, tasked with uncovering a piece of the past that would reinforce the truth of Soviet determination and invincibility. The team was small but well-picked. Dr. Pavel Ivanov, a seasoned archaeologist with little patience for distractions, was the unquestioned leader. Then there was Sasha Markov, a linguist whose skeptical nature made him an invaluable counterpoint to the ideological fervor that surrounded our work. His knowledge of Central Asian folklore would come in handy, though I often wondered if his obsession with debunking superstitions might cloud his judgment when it came to things that didn't fit neatly into his rational framework. And then there was Sergeant Nikolai Volkov, an NKVD operative, our minder, who was sent to ensure that we didn't stray too far from the mission's true purpose. He kept his eyes on us, but we had little choice but to tolerate his presence. It was a strange group, but none of us truly understood the gravity of what we were about to uncover. We arrived in the Altai Mountains after several days of grueling travel. The landscape was stark, the air thin and biting. The mountains loomed over us, their jagged peaks casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the land. The place felt ancient, untouched by time. It was easy to believe that something malevolent could be hiding in those craggy cliffs. The entrance to the tomb was hidden beneath the earth, half buried in the rocky soil. But it wasn't the physical labor that made my heart race. It was the carvings. The inscriptions on the stone were unmistakable. Mongolian script, faded with age, warned of something, or someone, that should never be disturbed. As Sasha translated the words, a chill passed through me. "Only silence keeps peace," he murmured, his voice heavy with disbelief. Pavel insisted that we move forward. History, after all, had no patience for superstitions. But Sasha hesitated, looking around nervously. "We don't know what we're dealing with here. These warnings are not just ornamental." "We'll be fine," Pavel said, his voice unwavering. "This is a tomb, a historical discovery, nothing more." But even as he spoke those words, I could feel it, a creeping sense of dread that I could not shake. The tomb itself was a labyrinth, each chamber revealing more treasures than I could have imagined. Weapons, jewelry, and the skeletal remains of warriors who had once served a conqueror whose very name struck fear into the hearts of empires. The first skeleton we encountered was slumped against the wall of a narrow corridor, its once proud armor corroded, the remnants of a shattered sword clutched in bony fingers. Its skull was tilted back, mouth agape as if it had died screaming. My stomach churned at the sight. Was this a guardian of the tomb who had failed in his duty, or a foolhardy trespasser who paid the price for his ambition? The air grew heavier as we pressed on, and I found myself wondering if we, too, would meet a similar fate. We found more remains deeper inside, some seated as if in eternal vigil, their weapons arranged neatly by their sides. Others were sprawled across the floor, their bones scattered and broken, as though they had died in battle. Each one seemed to tell a story of loyalty, sacrifice, or defiance. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw one of the skeletal hands twitch, but when I blinked, it was still again. My rational mind dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The walls were adorned with carvings, scenes of conquest, bloodshed, and violent storms. It was a portrait of a man who had known no equals. The Mongols had subjugated much of Mother Russia herself and had kept their iron grip for centuries. The deeper we went, the colder it became. The air felt dense, thick with something I couldn't name. A strange sensation began to settle over me, a pull, as if the tomb itself was calling to me. We reached a wide corridor just before the final chamber, where Nikolai suddenly held up a hand, his sharp eyes scanning the floor and walls. "Wait!" he barked, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. He knelt down, inspecting an almost imperceptible groove in the stone floor. With the precision of a man used to searching for hidden dangers, he ran his hands along the wall, finding a series of minute holes. "A trap," Nikolai muttered grimly, tracing the faint outlines of a concealed mechanism. "Pressure plate here, and poison darts, most likely. It's primitive but effective." He didn't look at any of us as he spoke, his hands already at work disarming the deadly device. Watching him, I was struck by how meticulous he was. It reminded me of the stories I'd heard about his NKVD days, searching homes and safe houses for evidence, rooting out hidden enemies of the state. It was as if he could see what the rest of us couldn't, reading the tomb's intent like an open book. Finally, with a faint click, Nikolai stood and stepped back, a rare hint of satisfaction on his otherwise stony face. "It's safe now," he said. But even his calm, methodical nature couldn't dispel the feeling of unease that hung in the air. He adjusted the strap of his rifle and glanced back at me. "Stay close. There might be more." I nodded, though the tightness in my chest didn't ease. The shadows around us seemed to deepen as we approached the final chamber, as if the tomb itself was drawing us in. The skeletal warriors we'd passed earlier seemed almost alive now, their empty sockets watching, judging, warning us of what lay ahead. Finally, we reached the heart of the tomb. The sarcophagus sat upon a raised dais, dark and imposing, its jade inlays depicting scenes of violent battles, of chaos. I wanted to touch it, to feel the cold stone beneath my fingers, to understand what lay inside. Sasha was already studying the inscription surrounding the tomb. "This is him," he whispered. "Temüjin, the Khan of Khans." The room felt wrong. The walls seemed to breathe, exhaling a suffocating presence that threatened to swallow us whole. The temperature had dropped to near freezing, and whispers echoed in the chambers, low, unintelligible murmurs that carried a weight of ancient power. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest, but no one else seemed to notice. Nikolai was already dismissing it as nerves. "It's the cold," he said gruffly. "That's all." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed some unseen boundary. There were forces at work here, something older than any of us could comprehend. I had barely spoken the words of warning before Pavel's hands pressed against the sarcophagus lid, his stubborn determination overriding any hesitation. The low groan of stone against stone filled the chamber, followed by a sharp click. My stomach lurched. That sound wasn't just the weight of the lid, it was something else. Before I could shout for him to stop, the entrance behind us slammed shut with a thunderous thud. The sound ricocheted through the chamber like the toll of a funeral bell. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and I spun toward the doorway, dread gripping my chest. "What have you done?" Sasha's voice trembled as he stumbled back, clutching his notebook like it could shield him from what was to come. "It's just a mechanism," Pavel said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "These tombs are filled with them. It's nothing." But I knew better. It wasn't just colder, it was oppressive, as if the very atmosphere had grown heavier, pressing against my skin and invading my lungs. The silence that followed the door's closing wasn't truly silence. It was filled with whispers just beyond hearing, like a storm brewing in the distance. I stepped closer to Sasha, my fingers digging into his arm. "The warnings," I hissed. "Only silence keeps peace. Don't you understand? This tomb wasn't just a burial. It was a seal, a barrier to keep something contained." Sasha's face paled as he flipped through his notes, his fingers shaking. He began murmuring the inscriptions, each word landing like a stone in my gut. "Here lies the storm that cannot be tamed. Temüjin, Khan of Khans," he translated at last, his voice barely above a whisper. The whispers in the room grew louder, as if acknowledging the name. A chill ran down my spine, and I instinctively took a step back from the sarcophagus. Pavel tried to maintain his composure, his face set in grim determination. "This is just superstition," he insisted. "We've seen it in every dig, warnings to scare off grave robbers. We're scientists, not storytellers." But even as he spoke, I could see the cracks forming in his facade. His eyes darted nervously to the glowing carvings on the walls, their jade inlays pulsing faintly in the flickering light of our lanterns. Then came the visions. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Shadows danced across the walls, moving with a rhythm that didn't match the flickering flames. I blinked, trying to focus, but the images grew sharper. Flames, smoke, horsemen charging through the chaos, their faces obscured by helmets, their eyes glowing like embers. "No," I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't in the tomb anymore. I was on a battlefield. The heat of the flames licked at my skin, and the screams of the dying filled my ears. I clutched my head, willing the vision to stop, but it was no use. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, the sheer force of the Khan's conquests replaying in my mind. Entire cities burned, the thunder of hooves shook the earth, and I could hear the chant of 1,000 voices, a name repeated again and again: Temüjin. Sasha's scream snapped me back to the present. He was on his knees, staring at the walls, his notebook abandoned beside him. His lips moved, muttering incoherent words, as if he were in conversation with the tomb itself. Pavel was shouting something, but I couldn't hear him over the whispers, now deafening and overwhelming. My vision blurred, and I stumbled, clutching at the wall for support. Then came Nikolai's voice, sharp and panicked. This is your fault," he bellowed, the butt of his rifle raised and his eyes wild. His usual stoic demeanor had been stripped away, leaving behind a man gripped by fear and paranoia. "Nikolai, stop," I cried, stepping forward, but he swung the barrel toward me, his hands shaking. Sasha acted first. The gunshot echoed through the chamber, silencing the whispers for the briefest of moments. I stared at Nikolai's crumpled form, my breath caught in my throat. There was no time to mourn, no time to process what had just happened. The tomb was closing in around us. In the deepest chamber, we found the parchment encased in glass. Sasha translated it with trembling hands, and as the words came into focus, I felt my blood run cold. "To those who dare to disturb my eternal rest, a monstrous calamity even greater than myself will soon befall you." I knew then, with a sickening certainty, that we had unleashed something far worse than Genghis Khan himself. The storm had been waiting, imprisoned in that tomb for centuries, and now it was free to wreak chaos, war, and devastation upon the world once more. We barely made it out alive. The tremors shook the ground as the tomb collapsed behind us, burying Nikolai forever in its depths. We returned to civilization with our findings, our damning findings. But the authorities would never let us speak of them. The report was sealed, the truth hidden from the world. We returned to our apartments in Moscow exhausted, mentally and physically. After taking a warm shower, I checked the date, June 21st, 1941. Nothing special, right? I turned to the news, eager to know what happened in the time we've been away. The radio broadcast spoke of peace and harmony along the Soviet-German border, of cooperation between the two great nations. That seemed at odds with the dark whispers that had followed us out of the tomb. I could still hear them, the echoes of the storm reverberating in my mind. the distant sound of marching boots, the hum of engines, the thunder of gunfire. The storm was coming. Operation Barbarossa had already begun, and the world would never be the same again.